Hey everyone, welcome to Singularity Computers Client Build 18 Part 2. This build was put on hold for an exceptionally long time, but it is finally back with many upgrades and changes. I mean, it's almost a completely new system, and really I should just be announcing this as a new build number. I don't really think anybody would have noticed, just because of the amount of upgrades and changes that have been made. Now, this is a very interesting system. What it's going to be used for, it is actually a workstation build, and it has a bit of a different focus from my usual systems. I mean, it's a lot more of an industrial, practical system, more focused on the particular configuration that the customer is after. It's going to have a huge amount of hard drives. And so some of the upgrades that have been made are actually absolutely critical for the particular configuration that we are going for. In particular, the case, which we have changed from the Case Labs Magnum TH10 to the THW10. And the biggest difference between these two cases, because they actually do look quite similar, is the fact that the THW10 has twice as many 5.25-inch bays. So where the TH10 has 5.25-inch bays on one side, 13 of them, and then 3.5-inch on the other, the THW10 has 5.25-inch bays down both sides, so 26 of them in total. Both compartments are equal in size, so you can actually fit a lot more components. Where the TH10 fits 480mm radiators, the THW10 fits 560mm radiators. You can see that we're using Hardware Labs Black Ice Nemesis GTX radiators and the new Corsair magnetic levitation bearing fans. So we're using two 560s and two 420s. You'll find out why we're using the 420s shortly. There's a lot of reasons that I prefer to use Black Ice radiators. I've been using these since almost the beginning. Well, first of all, they're all copper and brass, unlike any other radiator, but really it's the specifications, the M4 threads, the particular fin arrays that Black Ice chooses. I find that they're very balanced. The split fin arrays, the 25 micron fins, the fin densities, but there are a lot of other things that I like, the build quality, the paint jobs. They're just an awesome radiator. I have been really looking forward to using the new Corsair magnetic levitation bearing fans for the first time. I cannot wait to do some proper testing and see what these fans are really capable of. Now, my first impression, I was actually a little bit shocked by the RPM. 2400 RPM is extremely high, and to me it's way higher than anybody is ever going to need. For water cooling these days, with the way the radiators are designed, the way we're generally building our systems with plenty of radiator capacity, powerful pumps, really you only need 1500 RPM maximum, and I actually prefer to use sub 1200 RPM fans. But in combination with fan control, I mean, these are a PWM fan, so connected up to your motherboard with PWM control or some sort of fan controller, they're going to be awesome. And there is nothing wrong with having that headroom there. I mean, if you're going to go for some extremely high overclocks, do an overclocking session, you can turn the fans up and make the most of that headroom. I mean, they're a practical, industrial, high-performance fan, and you can see that in the aesthetics. I've completed the installation of the fans, and I've also finished the custom wiring and cable management for the fans. Now, I have a lot to cover here, so let's try to get through this. First of all, this took me an entire day, and a lot of you are going to wonder how that is even possible. Well, that is where a lot of people underestimate custom wiring. Because if you take a look at the fans that we have here, we have 14 fans. Each fan is PWM. That is 4 wires per fan. That is 56 wire strands overall that needed to be modified and sleeved, which means that it is no different to sleeving the average power supply. So that is definitely where most of the time and effort went. Now, if you're just doing custom cables for your core components, compared to doing custom cables for the entire build, there is a lot of extra time and effort that needs to be considered. As you can see from this, even just the custom cables for the fans is the equivalent of sleeving an entire power supply when it comes to the time and effort that is involved. So let's cover what I actually did here. I've used SingularityComputers black M4 30mm button-head Allen key bolts and M4 washers to mount the fans. I've used one Mod My Toys PWM fan splitter per radiator, a single 4-pin to 4 4-pin splitter, and what this means is you only have a single extension cable coming from each radiator. So all of the wiring mess is confined to the radiators, and it's, you know, easily hidden. It just becomes a single clean unit, and then from here you just have a single extension. Now, there's a lot that I had to do just to install these fans. You can see that I've cut a piece off the frame here. And I had to do this because otherwise the cable would have been up like this. To make the most of this little cutout here, I had to cut off this piece because that piece is designed to hold the wire in position, but once you sleeve it, the cable is way thicker and far too thick to fit underneath this little piece. And you know, the only other thing I could have done is not sleeved into the center of the fan, but there was no way I was going to do that for the fans that are facing up like these, because it would have just looked terrible. So I cut all of them off for the fans that are facing up. For the fans that are facing down, I left them in position and I didn't sleeve into the center of the fan, not because I thought to myself, well, it's out of sight, so I don't need to anyway, because the cable would have protruded too far and it wouldn't have fit, even with this part cut off. It would have held these fans, you know, up off the radiator like this. And that's, I mean, just the way the cables are run on these fans is a serious problem for me. I love these fans. I love the way they look. They're going to perform incredibly well. They're just a beautiful fan. But, you know, the way the cables run across like this, not having enough room for sleeving, the channel is not deep enough. I mean, this is not problems that I run into with a lot of the other fans I use. It's always a little bit difficult, but not this difficult. You know, this seems like a step backwards for me. And this could so easily be solved. I mean, there's something that I could do right here that would just solve this problem once and for all. So it's just a little niggle that I have with these fans. Now, something else. The hole spacing for me didn't line up by about 2 millimeters. Because the grey anti-vibration rubber pushes out on the bolts so much that when you're trying to tighten them, they're facing outwards like this. So you have to really push them in to get them into the holes to tighten them up. And this is actually quite a serious problem, but you're only really going to run into this with M4 bolts because of the larger thread size. The smaller bolts, 632 and M3, you probably are still going to run into it, but it's not going to be as much of a problem. And, you know, you can see there's a gap on some of them, but on others, it was so hard to tighten up these bolts. Now, because of that, I couldn't do the usual trick that I do for my cable management. Usually I use cable ties and I cable tie around the bolt to hold all of these cables in position, and it just works beautifully. It's so clean and stealthy, you can't even see the cables. But because I couldn't do that, I had to use all of these ModSmart cable management components. But that's fine, it still looks great, it's all going to be out of sight. And you can see how I've managed them. Everything customized to length, clean. It's just a great way of doing things. I've also put matte black vinyl in the center of the fans, replacing the stickers. The stickers on the backs of the fans, you know, they don't look that great, so I wanted to remove those. These ones on the front, they look fine. Corsair logo, you know, but they're fairly subtle. So that's about it. The radiators and fans are ready to be installed into the case. I've finished installing the radiators and the fans. I've used SingularityComputers black M4 6mm button-head Allen key bolts and M4 washers to mount the radiators directly to the case. You need to be very careful about the bolts that you use to mount your radiators, particularly if you're mounting your radiator directly to the case, because then you have even less margin of error. And you can see the margin of error that we have here is very small. If these bolts were a few millimeters longer, they would be touching those radiator fins and damaging them. Now, these radiators are designed to have only fins underneath where the bolts are. So if the bolts are too long, they're only going to damage the fins, which is just aesthetic damage. There's obviously no fluid flowing through those fins, so it's not going to cause the radiator to leak. But I do see a lot of radiators with the channels directly underneath the bolts, which means that if you go a little bit too far when you're tightening a bolt, the bolt is too long, you are going to destroy the radiator completely. There are also a lot of radiators with protection now, with a little panel underneath where the bolts are, but it's just a little panel and it's sitting on the channels. And, you know, it's only going to take so much pressure before it pushes through and punctures those channels. So, you know, don't let that protection give you any more confidence. No matter what, you need to be very careful about the length of your bolts. It needs to be absolutely perfect. No doubt some of you have been wondering why I have two 560mm radiators and two 420mm radiators for this build. Well, I'm sure some of you have figured out by now that we're going to be mounting hot swap bays all the way down one side. And obviously, because of the length of the hot swap bays and because of how many we're installing, they're not going to fit between the radiators. They're going to have to, well, they're going to take up all of the bays on this side except for one. The hot swap bays are iStar USA BPNDE series, and these are definitely one of my top choices when it comes to hot swap bays. I've used them many times previously, including in my own personal builds. For this build, the goal was to fit 20 hard drives, and these come in a range of different sizes and colors, including all black, but this particular version turns 3 5.25-inch bays into 5 3.5-inch bays. So it was just perfect for this build. Also the fact that they're SATA 3 SAS capable. But the build quality and the materials are just awesome. I mean, they're almost all aluminium. We have black brushed aluminium casing. On the front here, you can see the fronts of the doors are brushed aluminium, but then the holes are polished. And then over here we have a third finish, which is a sandblasted finish. These are also anodized, the doors. So this is not plastic, it's all aluminium. You can see that the doors are extruded aluminium. This little piece here is actually plastic, but you know, it really looks the same as the metal, so it doesn't take away from the quality. These pieces here are sprung steel, and you can see the backplane in there. So these are also toolless, which is also a big plus. Obviously lockable. One of the things about hot swap bays is that they're often a real mess on the back. They have a combination of Molex connections, SATA power, data, just way too many connections. But these just have two SATA power connections, and then obviously the 5 SATA data connections. So we have an 80mm fan, and that's another thing with hot swap bays. Sometimes the fans are too loud, but these have a high and low setting for the fan, and on low they're very quiet. And you can also turn off the hard drive activity LEDs, which are obviously on the front. Now, I have swapped out these fans previously for Noctua fans, so that is something else you can do. You can see the hard drive activity LEDs are just here, one for each. So you can see that I've removed the fan. What you have to do to swap out the fans is just change over the connector. So you just need the pins, and you can reuse the same connector. Really not that difficult, doesn't take long. So with them comes an installation guide, keys because they're lockable, and also some SATA data cables. Now, I don't yet know for sure if these are even going to fit with the 420mm radiators, because you can see the gap that we have at the front here for them is not that big. It's, you know, looking pretty tight, and I haven't even tried them yet, but from my estimations, they are going to fit. Worst case scenario, we may have to drop back to 280mm radiators. And you might be thinking, oh, that's really bad. But we already have a 560mm radiator per loop, which is more than enough. You know, in a dual loop build, one 560mm radiator for each loop is enough. The 280 is just going to be a nice extra, but I still want to make the most of this case, the capabilities. So obviously I'd definitely rather use the 420mm radiator, and it is going to work. I'm going to make it work. If they don't fit, I can remove the 80mm fan. Now, then the hard drives are not going to have cooling, but we can actually create negative pressure inside of the case to draw air through them. But I actually think I'm going to be able to get them to fit, so I don't really think any of that is going to be necessary. But let's find out for sure and install them. So you can see that I've installed 2 of the hot swap bays, and I am really happy with the way they look. The combination of black and silver is just perfect for this build. If you hadn't already gathered, the color scheme for this build is going to be black and silver. And just imagine when they're all the way down one side here. On the other side, we're going to have fans and the Aquarius 6 XT. So it's just going to look great. But I have run into a problem with the other 2 hot swap bays. Now, it probably looks like they're going to fit, and it may look like all I need to do is remove this splitter. And yes, that is easy enough. I can just move this splitter, up onto the rear side of the mid panel here. And that is something I am going to do. But the hot swap bays are still 10 millimeters too long. So they don't fit, but only just. The thing is, all I need to do to make them fit is remove the 80 millimeter fans from 2 of the hot swap bays, which is going to be just fine. The 2 middle ones will have the 80 millimeter fans. The other 2, there's going to be a lot of exhaust fans in this build. Now, what I'm actually going to do is deliberately create negative pressure. I was the one who started the whole thing about positive pressure for dust prevention, but in this build, we need the negative pressure to get some airflow for these hard drives. And as time goes on, I'm becoming less and less concerned about dust, because I know there's nothing you can do to prevent it. All you can do is slow it down very slightly, and is it really worth it? So we're going to have, obviously, the power supply exhausting. The radiators cancel each other out. We have the same amount of fans drawing air in as exhausting, so you can forget about those. But I'm also going to have a couple, actually 3 fans on the front panel exhausting. I can have another one on the rear panel, on the motherboard tray, exhausting air out the back. So that is going to create plenty of airflow through those hot swap bays. But I'm going to come back to the hot swap bays. Let's take a look at some of the other components I've been preparing for installation. A lot of people still ask me what these pump and res configs actually are, even though I've been using them for so many years now. I mean, actually updated these. I've been using these since 2010, and I'm pretty sure they were around, well, at least some of the components were around before that, the D5 pump tops. And, Bits Power has just added onto the config over the years, but this is still, honestly, my favorite pump and res config because it is so minimalist, it is so clean and elegant. There's nothing here that doesn't need to be here. But I think the difficulty for a lot of people is that you cannot purchase this as a single unit. You have to purchase all of the components separately. And there are a lot of different options for each of the components. There are different res tube sizes, different colors for the pump covers, different pump tops. So there's really a lot to be considered, but there are actually 5 components that make up this particular configuration which need to be purchased separately. So first of all, the D5 pump cover, and this is the black sparkle version. The D5 pump top, and this is the acrylic version. And then you need to purchase the upgrade kit, and this is the upgrade kit to 50. So it's obviously what the D5 pump cover and pump top are, but the upgrade kit is this. You can see the join just here. So it's everything past that point, including the reservoir tube. And it also comes with a top, but a single opening top, which means you cannot run your loop back to the top of the res with that config. So if you want to run your loop back to the top of the res, you need to purchase a triple opening top, and you need to purchase the aqua pipe, which you can see inside of the reservoir. And that obviously brings the coolant coming back into the res below the level of the coolant in the res, stopping air from going back into the loop and stopping noise. So a beautiful pump and reservoir configuration, which has been around for an incredibly long time, but I still like it a lot. There's actually quite a bit we need to do to be able to install these, and I'll certainly be making a big feature out of them as always, and we'll be using SingularityComputers reservoir mounts to install them, of course. We also have the Aquarius 6 XT for this build, and this is a component that I have used in so many builds, and I mean, I love the Aquarius. It is just awesome, and it has improved so much over the years, and the Aquero 6 is just, such an improvement over the previous versions. The software now is a lot better. Compatibility, you have lighting. There's a lot of cool things you can do with the Aquero, but for me, it is all about the fan curves. And I'm going to take you through my configuration of the Aquero, how I'm going to be running the fans, how I have them connected, everything configured, including the software in this build log. I know I've done this a couple of times previously, but the software is always being updated. There is always new things to talk about for the Aquero. But, just take a look at the connectivity and the functionality here. This component is absolutely worth it, mainly for a build like this with so many fans. So we have a couple of add-ons here. We have the Aquero 6 heatsink, which I've already installed, the black version. So that's this piece here. And, if anything, you can install that for aesthetics because it really cleans up the back of the PCB. Otherwise, it's green and there's, just mess everywhere. So it cleans things up nicely, but obviously also gives you the extra cooling. And on the front, I've installed the black front because it actually comes with the silver front. So that's going to match up. I guess the silver would have worked quite nicely for this build, but I don't know. I just like the black one a lot better. So definitely one of my favorite components and a very important addition to an extremely high-end water-cooled system like this one with a lot of fans and a big water cooling system to control and manage. I just couldn't wait any longer. I just had to get the EVGA GTX 1080 FTWs out of the box for a look because EVGA makes some beautiful coolers, great looking graphics cards, really nice choice of packaging here too. These graphics cards are definitely some of the nicest components I've seen, and considering that they also have lighting inbuilt, RGB lighting, they are just amazing looking cards. We're going to be ripping off all of that though, obviously. The stock coolers, the backplates are all going to be gone, and we're going to be installing EK water blocks and backplates, but we'll leave that for the next part of the build log. So that sums up this video. Thanks for watching, and remember that none of this would be possible without our patrons.